From gargoyles to the Caribbean, we talk to Greg Weisman here at Momocon 2015. This is the OSMcast. Hey folks, Basil here. Welcome back to the OSMcast. We have an interview for you from Momocon 2015. Greg Weisman. He is one of the original creators of the animated show Gargoyles. Along with, he's done Star Wars Rebels. He's also done a Star Wars comic. He worked on Young Justice and the Spectacular Spider-Man cartoon shows. He also writes novels. The dude's done a lot. And we got to talk to him all about it, so kick back and listen up. Thanks again for Momocon and Greg Weisman for taking the time out to talk to us, along with Charlie from the Chainsaw Buffet podcast. Without further ado, here we go. We're here at Momocon 2015 with a most guestiness of guests. He has worked on many various animated things throughout the ages. He is the one, he is the only, he is the Greg Weisman. Thank you for being on.
Happy to be here.
Tell us a little about yourself for the viewers listening.
My name is Greg Weisman. I'm probably best known for being the creator of Gargoyles and one of its producers. I've also been a producer on shows like Witch, The Spectacular Spider-Man, Young Justice, and Star Wars Rebels. I've also written a lot of comic books. Right now I'm writing Star Wars Kanan comic book for Marvel and Lucasfilm. And I've written a couple novels, Reign of the Ghosts and Spirits of Ash and Foam. They're the first two books in a 9-book series about a young girl on a chain of Caribbean islands who sees dead people.
So what got you started originally in writing and then into the entertainment industry?
I started writing stories in second grade. We had spelling words, and the homework was to put each spelling word into a sentence, but I took it one better and put all the sentences together and made a story. And I had a great second grade teacher who was so impressed with that she made a little book for me of all my stories. And from that point on, I was hooked. And I've always wanted to be a writer. I've always wanted to be a storyteller. When I was in college, I started working freelance for DC Comics when I was 19. And then when I graduated college, I went on staff there as an editorial assistant, which is a really fancy title for a Xerox boy, basically, and worked my way up to associate editor. Then I moved back to Los Angeles and went to graduate school, and then after graduate school got a job as a junior executive at Walt Disney Television Animation. Worked my way up to director of series development there. And while I was there, developed a show called Gargoyles and then moved over to produce it. And then from that point on, I was sort of been a writer, producer, occasional voice actor, voice director, story editor, that kind of thing.
Looking through your credits, there are a lot of, it's really almost mind-boggling, the number of shows that you've done something for.
Well, I'm old. I'm really old, so...
But how do you, how do those kind of things come about where you write one episode of a show or a handful of episodes, and then you're over here with how do those opportunities actually come up for you? Is that just talking with other people at the studio that come up and say, well, hey, why don't you come over here and do this for us? Or
usually it's about friends of mine who are story editing on this show or that show. Sometimes, most often it's like, hey, I need work. I'm in the Animation Guild, which is our union, and I need to do a certain amount of work every 6 months to keep my health insurance, so, and a certain amount of union work. So I actively chase down script here, script there to make sure that I'm maintaining my health insurance. And every once in a while, a guy or a woman will call me because they need help on something. But honestly, that's rare. Usually I'm chasing work, not the other way around. Work rarely chases me. I chase work.
What's it like working with Star Wars on two different fronts now, both on the animation side as well as the comic side?
The animation show was great. I was working with two terrific partners, Dave Filoni and Simon Kinberg. Great writing staff, an amazing voice cast. And had a great time on season 1. I'm not doing season 2 of Star Wars Rebels. I moved on to other things, but I'm really enjoying doing the comic. It's fun to be able to, we figured out backstories for all these characters at the beginning of the process for season 1, and but we knew we wouldn't get to show a lot of those backstories on TV. There just isn't time in a 22-minute episode to sort of flash back to the past. In fact, I was told by Dave Filoni that Star Wars doesn't do flashbacks, not within an episode. In other words, we might do a whole prequel that's set back there,
right?
But you don't, stylistically, Star Wars doesn't flash back to things in the middle of stuff. So what's great about doing this comic is that I get a chance to tell these stories that we all came up with as a team. We finally get to sort of reveal them to the fans, and that's really gratifying.
To generalize a bit from the last question, since you've written for television, for comics, you've written novels, what are the for you the major differences between the different mediums, and do you have a preference?
I don't have a preference. They have much more in common than not, but there are differences. You think about limitations in a TV episode, it's mostly about time. At the end of the day, you've only got 22 minutes. Subtract out the main title and the end credits, and you've probably only got 19 and a half. But it's a very specific number. It's not like, they'll tell you what the number is. And every show's slightly different. It's always somewhere between 19 and 22. But, if they say the number is 19 minutes and 35 seconds, that's it. You can't be any shorter than that. You can't be any longer. In comic books, it's the page count. Kanan, for example, is 20 pages, no more, no less. So you have to think in terms of those sort of literal limitations. And what I've found is that a comic book is about the equivalent of 3 acts of a television episode. That is, if a comic book's about 20, 22 pages, it's more or less the equivalent. It's the other way around. 3 comic books is the equivalent of 1 episode. In other words, comic books is the equivalent of 1 act of a television series, just in terms of how much content you can fit in. So if I was taking, which I don't do, but if I was going to adapt an episode of some show I had done and just adapt it into comic book form, it would probably take me 3 20-page issues to adapt it. Novel writing, there's a lot more, on the one hand, flexibility, because no one says to you, the novel has to be exactly 223 pages, no more, no less. The novel, my first book was, over 100 pages. My second book was twice as long, and they're in the same series. It just, you write until the story is over. The difference there is that you're not collaborating with anyone. And there are good points about that and bad points. Collaboration takes a lot of the pressure off. If I'm going to some setting, I've got literally a painter to paint that picture. I've got voice actors to make sure that my so-so dialogue really still sounds genius. I've got composers who help create a mood for the piece. If I'm doing a novel, it's me alone. I've got to compensate for the lack of actor, the lack of painter, the lack of composer, and make that all happen in the words. So on the one hand, it's very challenging, but on the other hand, it makes it very gratifying if you feel like you pulled it off.
Now, I know nowadays there are a lot of cartoon shows that do much more of a narrative than cartoon shows used to do. Stuff like Avatar: Last Airbender and whatnot, but like Gargoyles did it way back when. I remember that was one of the things when I was a kid watching it. That was one of the things that really besides me being a literary nerd, and suddenly all these awesome Shakespearean folks are running around with these awesome gargoyles. But the fact that there was much more of a narrative to it. There were actually character development, like story arcs, like things actually happening. It wasn't just the same, status quo at the end of every episode.
Mm-hmm.
That was really neat. How did you convince them to let you do that?
I didn't convince them to let me do it. They just let me do it. I think a lot was going on at the Walt Disney Company at the time. I mean, a lot. And in fact, there were a lot of shows that were kind of in trouble, having some difficulties for one reason or another at Walt Disney Television Animation. And I had been a development executive before moving over to produce Gargoyles. So it's not that the way I often describe it is it's like a lunatic asylum where, they're trustees and there's still patients there, but they're less crazy than some of the other patients. So they give them a stick to keep the really crazy patients in line. And so I was like that. I was like a trustee at a lunatic asylum. I was the lunatic most trusted. So they just let me do it. And they weren't paying a lot of attention to it, honestly. And I remember Frank Parr, who was my partner on Gargoyles, and I once went to lunch with our boss, Gary Kreisel, halfway through season 2, or not even halfway, like 3/4 of the way through season 2. And Gary was like really apologetic. He's like, look, I have not had time. I've been so swamped with this and with that. I haven't had any time to sort of read what you guys were up to and pay attention. It's like, how's it going? We're like, oh, it's going pretty good. It's good. And he's like, so what are you doing on the show? And so we talked a little about what we're doing on the show. And we got to the part where we said, oh, and Xanatos married Fox, and they're having a kid. And he's like, oh, I wouldn't do that. Villain's having a kid? No, you don't want that. You don't want the villains to be raising a kid. I wouldn't do that. There's this long pause as Frank and I look at each other, and I'm like going, well, see, we already did it. And you can tell there's another long pause as Gary considers this, and he's got two choices here. He can either sort of throw a fit, not literally, but I mean, sort of say, all right, look, stop what you're doing. You got to take this plot line out. We got to rip this all apart, go back into the show and change everything. And he knows that if he says that, that'll affect schedule, that'll affect budget, it'll affect all sorts of things because we're already down the road with it. And what I saw really was just this wave of exhaustion roll over him, and he goes, well, okay, but don't dwell on it. I don't know what that meant. I don't even know if he knew what it meant. But so we said, sure, we won't dwell on it. And we just did it. But like I said, that was really, we really were given tremendous freedom on that show. It was a unique set of circumstances. And we just got to do it.
What would you say is the weirdest or alternately the most difficult thing you've ever had to write for?
Weirdest or most difficult? I once wrote a Bratz movie. I felt a little bit like I was had made a deal with Satan. But they never made it. And by the time I was done writing the movie, I actually really liked it and was sort of like really bummed that they didn't make it. That was the most difficult. Nothing's immediately jumping out as difficult. There are certain, it's always tough when something doesn't get made, but I don't know. Nothing really most hard, It's all work, but I like my job. I like that part. I like the work. I don't like dealing with all the politics and stuff of the industry, but I do like the actual work.
One of the more interesting elements from Young Justice, for me at least, was the time skip. I know when I first saw it, at first I had no idea. Like, it completely blew my mind because I was like, "What is going on? Did I miss a lot? I don't know what just happened." How was the decision made to do that? Because I mean, you occasionally see that in, like, I find it's more, if it's common anywhere, it's more common in, like, anime series, not so much in my experience in Western animation. How did that decision come about to do something like that?
It came out really early on in the development of the series. We decided that we were telling a story about growing up, and the first season was going to be 6 months, more or less in real time. We started July 4th and ended January 1st, all in 1 year, and we dated everything so you knew exactly how the flow of time was going. If you were obsessive, you could write down the dates like they did on the Young Justice Wiki and track exactly, how much time had passed between episodes and stuff like that. Sometimes it was only, a couple hours between episodes. Sometimes it was a week and a half or something like that. But, we had 26 episodes across 6 months. And there's just no way over a 6-month period that you can show characters grow up. You can show them learn lessons. You can show them, mature a little bit, but you're not going to see them grow up. So it became important to us in a show about growing up that if we had a second season, that we were going to have to jump ahead. And so season 2 takes place between January 1st and July 4th. So it's a year in the life. It's just that we stuck 5 years in between the 2 6-month periods. And that allowed us to show Robin become Nightwing and become leader of the team. It allowed us to show Aqualad, Kid Flash, Artemis, Superboy, Miss Martian, Zatanna really grow up and take on leadership roles. And then it also allowed us to bring in a new group of younger characters to be mentored, in this case, not by the adult superheroes like Superman, Batman, but by these kids who had been, these guys in their late teens and early 20s who had been the 14, 15, 16-year-olds in season 1. And we would not have been able to do that without the time skip.
So something I learned today is that you are also a novelist on top of everything else that you do. And when you mentioned it, I'm like, wait, Caribbean Islands? That's not normally a place you see stuff set in for like supernatural or fantasy stuff.
Yeah, the novels are entwined with the mythology of the Taino people, who were the indigenous pre-Columbian inhabitants of the Caribbean. If you like the work I've done on gargoyles, this has the same sort of feel, but it's using a mythology that most of pop culture is not familiar with. And it's a wonderful mythology. It is rich. The stories in Taino mythology are as rich and interesting as Greek mythology or Norse mythology, and yet no one's ever... Well, there's scholars who have and stuff, but from a pop culture standpoint, no one has seen these stories. And I stumbled on them, really. I was originally researching a series set in New Orleans, and there's a big Caribbean influence in New Orleans, so I started researching the Caribbean, and I just became fascinated with the Caribbean. And I'm also fascinated with the tourist economy culture. So on the one hand, this girl, Rain, she lives in a bed and breakfast that her parents own and operate. So she lives in a place that is full of family and strangers every day of her life. And even at the age of 13, she's serving breakfast to tourists. She's cutting bait for tourists. She's making beds for tourists. She feels really trapped because even though this is a destination resort and people from all over the world come to it, from her point of view, it's a really small town. And so having that layer of reality with the layer of the supernatural and this mythology run through it has made writing these 2 books a lot of fun. And it's a 9-book series, so I've got 7 more to write. I'm researching book 3 right now. And the other thing that we're doing is we're doing a radio play, an audio play version of Reign of the Ghosts. And this isn't your standard audiobook where one narrator just reads the whole book and plays all the characters, young and old, male and female, living and dead. We've got 20 actors playing 30 roles. We've got Marina Sirtis. We've got Brent Spiner. We've got Ed Asner. We've got Josh Keaton, who was the Spectacular Spider-Man. We've got Bryton James, who was Static in Young Justice. Eric Lopez, who was Blue Beetle in Young Justice. We've got Steve Bloom, who's Zeb in Star Wars Rebels. We've got Vanessa Marshall, who's Black Canary on Young Justice. Mary Jane Watson on Spectacular Spider-Man. And Hera Syndulla on Star Wars Rebels. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. We have 20 phenomenal performers in this thing. We've got a full musical score and sound effects, the works. It's like a 4-hour animated movie if you don't count the fact that there's no animation. And we did a Kickstarter for it. We fully funded. And that will be coming out in September or early October at the latest.
This isn't, obviously it's not the first time that you've utilized actors that sort of made their names in Star Trek. Gargoyles is chock full of them, which is one of the things I loved about it. Did you have any hand in that decision, or was that someone else?
Yeah, no, I mean, again, I was one of two producers on Gargoyles, myself and Frank Parr, and then we had a very talented voice and casting director named Jamie Thomason, who also did that job on Spectacular Spider-Man and Young Justice. But Frank and Jamie and I conferred on everything in terms of casting. The way we got started with Star Trek actors is very straightforward. We were auditioning for the role of Elisa. Marina Sirtis came in and read for it. She wasn't right for Elisa, but we thought, she might be good for Damona. So we brought her back in to read for Damona, her and a bunch of actresses. But she happened to read Damona first and was phenomenal. Then we had to listen to all these other actresses afterwards and try and keep an open mind, but we just thought, no, she's great. Meanwhile, completely independently, Jonathan Frakes came in and read for Xanatos, and we cast him. We weren't sitting there going, let's get Star Trek actors. They won the roles by virtue of their talent. And then, so week in, week out, they're in the booth, recording for us. But, we'd be in the booth, and Jamie, our voice director, would say to us, so what do we need in terms of guest characters, next week? And just as an example, I'd be going, well, we need, we're casting Goliath's brother, Coldstone. So, Goliath is Keith David, so he's got all these big chops and stuff. So for his brother, we need someone who's got big, deep chops like Keith has. Who could we get for that? And I'm looking through the glass, and there's Marina and Jonathan, and I'm like going, well, what about Michael Dorn? And it was literally like that. It was just, they were literally there, so they were like physical reminders for us that there was this great ensemble of actors in town who were available to us, and it didn't hurt that Marina and Jonathan were like saying to these guys, most of whom had not done much animation, if any, before, hey, it's a good gig. The scripts are good, and we're having fun, and they pay, and there's no makeup, you don't have to put the big headpiece on or the huge wig or anything like that. And hell, you don't even have to memorize your lines, so you can just come in and so they all had a good time, and we got Nichelle Nichols to play Elisa's mom, Diane Maza, and so at one point I was like, well, let's see if we can get someone from every Star Trek show. So we got Avery Brooks, we got Kate Mulgrew, and there was a publicity benefit to it. I would never cast someone solely for publicity. They'd have to fit the role. They'd have to be right for it. But, I'm not going to, if we can get publicity, I'm not going to knock it. So, we did that too. And then at this stage, it's not about that. It's just about, Marina's so great that why wouldn't I use her in Young Justice? Why wouldn't I use her in Reign of the Ghosts? All these people, whether it's Keith David or Tom Adcox or Ed Asner, are so fantastic that I just, use them over and over again because they, they're making my stuff better.
You draw a lot, as evidenced both from the novels and Gargoyles. You draw a lot on, and are not afraid to draw on, other literary works, on mythology, on history. It seems obvious that you put quite a bit of effort into that. What is that draw for you?
There are great stories out there. I'm not going to do better than Shakespeare, so why not use them? It's public domain. These great myths, whether they're Greek myths or Norse myths or Taino myths, these are phenomenal stories. When we were doing the first episode of Gargoyles, we set it in Scotland in 994. We picked 994 because it was exactly 1,000 years before the show was going to premiere in 1994. There was no better reason than that. I mean, there was not like we did research and came up with that's the year it should be. No, it was 1994 minus 1,000. We set in Scotland, not because they were actually speaking English in Scotland in 994, because they were not. But from a suspension of disbelief standpoint, setting it in a country that was currently English-speaking, as opposed to like France or something like that, it was a little easier to get through the suspension of disbelief of why we were hearing them all talk in English. And we chose Scotland because it was further north. It felt like a little more barbaric, a little more in the hinterlands, and less like, England, where things might be a little more civilized. And then we had Vikings attack the castle, not because we researched anything, but just because, hey, Vikings are cool, After the fact, we then did a little bit of research and found out that, oh my God, Vikings were attacking Scotland in that time period. We had by accident gotten it right. But having done that, we made a conscious decision, okay, we got lucky this time. From now on, let's get the history right. We're going to weave our fantasy in and among it. But let's do the history correctly whenever we can. So I had a couple people doing research for me in those days. One was my assistant, Monique Beatty, who's gone on to be a producer in her own right at places like Nickelodeon and DreamWorks. And another is a friend of mine, Tuppence McIntyre, who's not even in the industry. She's a deputy district attorney in Los Angeles who is Scottish by her heritage and so is just interested in Scottish history. And so she did research, and we found out that there are these great stories about the kings and nobles of Scotland. They researched the actual story of Macbeth, which Shakespeare largely got wrong. And we found that that was a fascinating story. I mean, just a terrific story. And we're like, why wouldn't we want to use this? So we weaved our characters in and among this actual history of Scotland and got great stories out of it. We used the mythology in Gargoyles of Africa, of Native American Indians in the American Southwest and the American Northwest, of Norway, of Greece, of the legends of the Golem in Prague, Arthurian legends, and all this sort of stuff. We laced in there because of what they brought to us. It's a very similar, like, why am I using the same actors? It's what they bring to the table. What this history, what these myths, what these legends bring to the table is so much great material. Again, my attitude is, why wouldn't I use it?
Possibly the most important question I could ever ask is, what work have you worked on would be best improved by the addition of giant robots?
Of what?
Giant robots.
Giant robots.
Oh, my usual question.
Well, giant robots would fit in most all of it. I could definitely see giant robots in Gargoyles. I could definitely see it in Young Justice, even Spider-Man. So I'm going to say, what wouldn't I use giant robots in? So.
Valid.
If you could get that Bratz movie made, would you want to use giant robots?
No, but but I could see using sort of it was an Arabian Nights themed movie actually, so I could see using like a big clay sort of golem like thing or whatever, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think our time is up. So thank you so much for chatting with us.
Happy to do it. Thank you, guys.
And I guess before we go, if you could plug those novels one more time, just for my own benefit.
Sure. 2 novels, Reign of the Ghosts, that's Reign, R-A-I-N, of the Ghosts, and Spirits of Ash and Foam. Both are available on Amazon as ebooks or as paperbacks. You can also go into any bookstore. If they're not literally on the shelf the day you happen to walk in, you can go to the front desk. They can order them for you. You can follow me at Greg_Weisman on Twitter. I'm also on Facebook. I just joined Facebook. I don't really understand Facebook yet, but I seem to have a page and a profile page. I'm not sure which is which or what the difference is, but I have both. And finally, last but not least, I've had a website for about 18 years called AskGregWeisman.com, where I've been answering questions. It started off as mostly Gargoyles focused, but now it's about Young Justice or Spider-Man or whatever, Star Wars Kanan. And I've been answering questions there for nearly 2 decades, so there's this huge archive of already answered questions. And it's a searchable archive, so 90% of what you might want to ask has probably already been asked, and you can find it by searching the archive. And then the other 10%, 5 of it, you're probably asking for spoilers. I won't give you any spoilers. But then, the remaining 5%, I'll answer your questions. So you can ask them there. I'm about a year behind, honestly, about answering questions on Ask Greg, but I do get to them all eventually.
Well, once again, thank you so much for talking with us. It's an absolute pleasure.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Once again, thank you, Momocon and Greg Weisman, for letting us have the chance to talk. You can find us at theawesomecast.com, OSMcast.com, for all our other various shows like reviews and interviews and all sorts of things. And, of course, you can check out the Chains of a Fae podcast at chainsofafay.com. Please like, subscribe, tell friends. We would really appreciate it. But until next time, we're out.